Well, business and non-government organizations remain the most trusted South African institutions. This is according to the findings of the 2025 Edelman Trust Barometer South Africa report, Trust and Crisis of Grievance for South Africa, released this week. 68% and 63% of survey respondents indicated that they trust these two institutions respectively. The media remains less trusted at 46%. However, while trust in government has suffered in recent years, this year's data noted a 7% increase in government trust. It's now sitting at 36%. The research was conducted between October and November last year. And to tell us more about this barometer, we are joined by the CEO of the Edelman Africa, and that's Karena Crerar. Thank you, Karena. Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so I'm going to start off with the basics. Who was surveyed? We know when it took place, but how does the survey work?
So this survey takes place across 28 countries globally. In each market, we survey approximately 1,200 people. So we try and make it statistically relevant to the market. And as you mentioned, the results were actually done and fielded in October to November of last year.
Okay, so it's a variety of people from different walks of life, and I suppose it's meant to just be a quick survey of perhaps your average South African.
Absolutely. So essentially what we're testing for is the levels of trust across the four main institutions in society. So those being business, government, NGOs, and the media. So we do that to really get a trust scoring and to really dig into the details of what is driving some of the levels of trust in society. And 9 times out of 10, it actually mirrors the events happening in society. And as you would have noted, we've been doing this for 25 years now. Yeah. So this is the 25th year that we've been measuring these different results, and year on year looking at how they change.
All right, so let's get into some of the details now. And it's quite interesting, these findings. And out of 13 surveyed countries that saw changes in government leadership last year, South Africa is one of only 2 to see an actual positive shift in trust to government. What did the respondents see as the reasons for this increase?
Yes, Leanne, I mean, this was quite a stunning statistic. I think it was just South Africa and Argentina, of all the countries that went to the polls last year, and those that obviously we survey, we were the only 2 who saw those shifts in levels of trust, and that is in the overall trust score. We don't have any qualitative data to substantiate this, but I think we can make some assumptions, given that these results came out after our own elections. This was probably the government of national unity, a more stable power supply. I think overall also a cautious optimism surrounding the capabilities of both business and government. You mentioned at the beginning of the show the increase in levels of business as well. So I think all of that together has driven up our trust levels, and we're really pleased to see quite a statistical improvement, a significant improvement in levels of trust for government specifically.
It is. I mean, it does certainly help, and one sort of does feel a little bit better that we are looking to the government in a better light. And obviously, after elections, one can only imagine that it is this joint government of national unity that people had trusted and thought, okay, well, we'll put our hope in there. It'll be interesting to see what happens now, especially with a lot of differences happening. So this, I suppose, as we keep saying, this was last year these were done. So it'll probably be a very different picture this year, depending on how this all does. So October 25th to November 16 are the exact dates. Do you see this trust in government continuing with the current unknown fate, really, of the GNU, whether it lasts or doesn't last?
Leanne, it's difficult to make a prediction on that. However, we have seen over the years how quickly trust can be won and lost for institutions. And we noted this also in our research during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw a trust bubble for government, many governments around the world, including our own in South Africa, where society was initially very positive about the way governments had actually handled the crisis. But then we saw it drop off when, unfortunately, society realized that government alone certainly couldn't handle a crisis of this magnitude. So we have seen these trust bubbles before. I think if the establishment of the GNU was a driver of trust, which I think we can assume, I think the results is going to show us that society is looking for leadership from its institutions one way or another. So whatever construct that comes in, I think they really just want to feel like their needs are being heard. They're going to feel change and see change in society, and there's going to be a better outlook for the future remains the same. So I think we can infer that whatever the outcomes are of these discussions, it will impact trust one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, you've been doing this for 25 years, so you've really got a beautiful picture to look at, to see the shifts in how people feel about government, media, business, NGOs, all of these things. Was there a significant shift in trends this past year? Did you see something that stood out for you?
There were a couple of trends specific to this year. I would say over the 25 years more broadly, we've seen that our findings really reflect public sentiment, and they offer a path forward following what we see as sort of major global events. And I think world events have challenged and upended the trust equation time and time again. Unfortunately, though, what we have seen over the 25 years is this ongoing institutional failure to meet the moment. And that's what's being reflected in the results. So we're seeing persistent fears from society around their economic outlook, the rise of fake news, which has further eroded trust in media, and by association, sort of the information that comes through, what to believe, what not to believe. All of this has given rise to this crisis of grievance, as we've called this theme of this year's report. And some of that also relates to how people are feeling, to how they're really going to affect the change. And that also includes how 4 in 10 South Africans are actually feeling as though they need to take more action. And they are really supportive of more activism around really driving that change for themselves, which could potentially be a worrying statistic.
Yeah. You know, as I keep saying, that this was done at the end of last year, and things have shifted so dramatically with particularly what's happening in US politics and the tariff wars that are happening right now. And we've got, you know, predictions coming out from some of the best economists around the world saying that possibly by the European summer, the world could be in a recession. And this is the reality that is looming over us. But moving it back to South Africa, at the time, 73% of employed South Africans cited that looming economic recession as the greatest threat to their job security. And I must emphasize that it has gone full speed ahead since this survey was done. How will the current geopolitics and trade wars contribute to this job creation concern we're seeing?
I think, unfortunately, it's just going to exacerbate it, Leanne. When you can physically see the impact on the economic indicators and you compound that with an overall sense of anxiety, I think we're all always feeling every day is a new story in the news. You can imagine how all of that unsubstantiated information and the volatility, the talk of a global recession, as you say, it's very difficult to trust in the competence of your traditional leadership structures and to remain optimistic when you don't know what the future holds. Yeah. So there is a high expectation that business, as the most trusted, has to bring sort of those well-paying jobs, reskilling, retraining for the future, to really give people a sense of improvement and opportunity and a growth path forward.
Yeah, it is fascinating how business comes out top. So how people feel that that business are the most trustworthy, as opposed to government. Business and NGOs, the most trusted institutions. 68% and 63% of the survey respondents indicated they trust these two institutions respectively. So that kind of stays steady. That they're quite high, the trust in NGOs and business.
Yes, I think when we think about trust, we think about it in 2 dimensions, Leanne. So we think about it as both competence and ethics. And business fares, as you can imagine, very well in terms of competence, the ability to get the job done. And NGOs fare very well on the ethics side, which is really that sort of positive contribution to society. So these 2 institutions are really being seen as the pillar of society, the pillars of society. And I think ultimately what people are looking for, according to our results, is that they're looking for a collaboration. Between business and NGOs, business and government. They're really looking to see, they understand one institution alone can't make the change by themselves. So they're really looking to see more of that collaboration to achieve some of these societal changes.
And that's something that we hear from government a lot, is these public-private partnerships, and there seems to be a lot more talk about this, with people realizing you can't go this alone. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. But one of the concerning findings as well is, and it's high, 77% of South Africans worry about experiencing prejudice or discrimination, wherever that may be. I imagine in normal society and in your work life as well. In schools as well, I imagine, highlighting a very pressing societal issue that institutions must address to foster inclusivity and equal opportunity. This is another part that is a lot under threat right now.
Absolutely. And I think according to our results, you can see this across a range of demographics, which is also interesting. So we can see that it puts pressure on institutions to take more action and not less on this issue. And I think, in line with our conversation earlier, I think NGOs have a very unique role to play. So we actually see them as the most trusted institution among those with the highest grievances. So they're also the most likely to be seen as a unifier. And even among those who see a lot of injustice in the system, they see the role that an NGO can play in helping to bring everybody together and help sort of knit back that fabric of society.
Yeah, sometimes, but not always, because sometimes it can also divide a nation. It really can, with especially with things that are happening now, currently as we speak. I mean, all eyes on the United States elections last year and the return of Donald Trump to office. This basically gives us a gift every single day. Something changes, and we know that. How much trust do the country's citizens have on the new government and businesses?
I'd love to be able to answer that categorically, but I think it would only really be speculation. Yeah. What I can say, though, is if we consider again the two dynamics of trust that I spoke about, so the competence and the ethics, and if we know that those two levers are what build trust and also erode trust, I think we can conclude that it's what will drive the country's citizens to determine whether they trust their administration will be whether they see the competence and the ability to deliver the change that's promised to them, and whether they see the ethics to support that. So is there integrity? Is there dependability? Are they hearing? Is what they're hearing matching what they're seeing? And do they feel like there's an overall positive contribution and impact on society? Those we know are the drivers of trust. So I think only time will tell where that ends up. So far, it's not painting the best picture of that. But I think if we can ultimately move to that position, citizens will certainly feel a lot more trusting of what they're seeing and hearing.
Yeah, I must say, I look forward to seeing what comes out at the end of the year. This is one I want to speak about before we start wrapping up now, the trust in media. And in South Africa, it's now sitting at 46%, which is it's quite worrying, especially working in the media, that we're seeing that the trust is dipping. How much does the lack of quality information and credible media sources influence the results we're seeing here?
Hugely. So we saw the rise of fake news and the impact that this was having on trust levels around 2018. And that is what has perpetuated the sort of lower levels of trust in media. In some markets, we can also see how politicized traditional news channels have become. So misinformation and disinformation is a huge driver of anxiety. We saw this also in the COVID-19 pandemic. People weren't sure where to get their information, who to believe, who not to believe. And unfortunately, social media is also pulling the side down under that sort of media umbrella as an institution. And a lot of people now are consuming their news and information online and through online channels. And this model of media and news is relying heavily on clicks for revenue. Yeah. So it's really becoming harder and harder to determine who should you believe, who shouldn't you believe. And I think, unfortunately, this is just driving the levels of trust down across the board.
Yeah. Do people turn, and very quickly, are they turning more to trusted news sources as opposed to sort of random sites that are pumping out news? I mean, do you find that they'll go to those news sources that they trust in and say, okay, well, if they're saying it, then it must be true. If not, no.
They are. Unfortunately, they don't know how to measure that trust level. Yeah. So what is credible to me may not be credible to you, and I think that's the difference here. What we're seeing as the most trusted source of information is online. Yeah. So while that remains trusted, I think people will choose their source of choice. and they'll use that as the basis for how they make determination around the facts, which is worrying. And I think all of us in the communications and media fraternity have a role to play around being better custodians of information and facts.
Without a doubt. Karena, thank you for talking to us, Chief Executive Officer at Edelman Africa. Those are the findings of the 2025 Edelman Trust Barometer South Africa report, Trust and Crisis of Grievance. It was released this week. It's 8. Here's your news.